Good afternoon and welcome to the Seneca County Industrial Development Agency meeting today, October 7th. Today we have three meetings, three in a row. The first one being for the Industrial Development Agency, the second one being for the Economic Development Corporation, and then the third one being for the Seneca County Funding Corp. So I think we'll start out with roll call. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Strencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Here.
Mr. Wadhams?
Yes.
Mr. Keim? Mr. Tom Murray? And Mr. Trout absent.
Yeah. First thing on the agenda, in your packet, you all received a copy of the meeting minutes from last month, September 2nd. Any corrections, comments? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Strencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadhams?
Yes.
Mr. Keim? Mr. Tom Murray? And Mr. Trout absent. Motion carried.
Next item is a review of the financial statements. Everyone received a copy in their packet. As a reminder, we did go through this previously between the audit committee and with our accountant and bookkeeper and our CFO, Bob Kernan, and be making changes. So this is still the original format, but it will be changing starting in January. The only real highlights for this month is we had a $42,000 loan disbursement to Schrader Farms, and we have $9,000 left to disperse on that loan. Other than that, everything else was standard, both income and expenses. Any questions or comments on the financials? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Strencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadhams?
Yes.
Mr. Keim? Mr. Tom Murray? And Mr. Trout absent. Motion carried.
Okay. Next on the agenda is discussion of the Trelina Solar Project. Sarah, if you could lead this.
Sure. So you all received in your packets a copy of the final resolution for the Trelina Solar Project. I would like to note that in the resolution, approval is conditional on the project receiving its Article 10 designation from the state, which is expected to occur late November or early December. So we will not actually be able to move forward with the official closing of any documents until that has come in. Aside from that, you've also received in here a copy of the minutes from the public hearing that was held September 22nd. We had quite a few attendees come. All spoke in favor of the project. Few were landowners that are under contract with Trelina, some other neighbors, some local labor representatives. So feel free to look at that there. I will, again, just sort of review what the proposed pilot is. So it's our standard solar pilot per our UTEP, which is the base tax payment on the properties plus a $4,500 per megawatt fee that increases 2% each year. The total estimated pilot payments for the project are approximately $7.32 million. That's the total over 15 years, with total sales and property tax exemption of roughly $18.34 million. Our cost-benefit analysis that we did, that was provided to the board at the last meeting, showed $3 of benefits for every $1 of cost for this project. that's really all I have to add right now about the project. Are there any questions about this resolution or the proposed pilot terms?
One question at the last meeting was, is there any way to verify that the actual labor contributions for the project are either reliable or auditable, so that we know if in fact it's whatever the number is that's proposed as a labor contribution to the economies, or any way to know that that's ever, the actual comes in at,
So,
above or below the estimate.
so I guess there's sort of two answers to that question. The first being that the cost benefit analysis software we use has some built-in assumptions for the project. So those are not a standard to which we hold the companies, because that's the software doing some of its own thing. We do have to track every year the number of jobs that are created, and construction jobs is one of them. So Kelly does keep track of that with our annual Paris reporting from the project. So we take the projected number of construction jobs that was in the application, and we track that against what they give us for actual hires. In terms of like local labor share, obviously we do have our local labor policy that they have to adhere to. And this project in particular is subject to New York State prevailing wage because of the level of assistance they're receiving from other agencies, not ourselves. And it's my understanding that they're working to negotiate a project labor agreement with some of our local unions. So there will be also additional insured compliance through those other parties, if that answers your question.
It's always hard to say, you know, if what they say that will happen actually does, is the real question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's not just.
The documentation does also require them to provide, the closing documentation requires them to provide documentation on employment to the extent necessary for the agency to confirm what it
Okay.
needs to confirm. So there's that.
Okay.
Sarah, can you clarify, we talked about this at the last time too, but with more and more solar projects on the horizon, certainly the state of New York is encouraging solar development.
Mm-hmm.
The pilot that we are pursuing in this resolution, how does that compare to the last one we did in terms of its consistency, its the ability to use this as the template as we go forward?
Great question. It's the same exact pilot as the last one we did for solar. And that was well researched prior to us updating our uniform tax exemption policy last year. So we did a lot of research on what other IDAs were offering in terms of solar tax exemptions. We also looked at what the state guidance was in terms of solar tax exemptions. And that's how we came to the $4,500 per megawatt with a 2% escalator, as well as the 15-year duration. So that was all centered around that. It was also based a little bit off of the state's real property tax law 487, which provides sort of a blanket solar exemption where they basically don't have to pay property taxes except for what the base tax is. So the pilot sort of goes above and beyond that. So that's where those numbers came from, and that's why we decided to actually lay that out in our UTEP and have a consistent policy, because then we're not in a position where we have to renegotiate every time a new solar project comes in and worrying if, you know, one is getting better benefits than the other. The answer is they're all the same.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the only difference is the Lodi one, the Fayette one, were the 5 megawatt projects, the very small community type ones, not subject to other public service type requirements. So with the Trilina, the big difference is the town of Waterloo negotiated the community host agreement. So that was done sort of separately.
Yes, so they're going to be getting a significant amount of additional revenue from that. That's approximately $1.15 million over the next 15 years, just to the town of Waterloo outside of the pilot payments. And then, just to add to Steve's point that this is a very different sort of scale of solar project, that is one of the additional things we researched. So there was always guidance from the state years ago, prior to sort of the growth in these types of projects, that the utility scale solar, like Trulina, would actually need substantially lower pilot payments to be financially feasible because of the way that their financials are structured with reimbursement rates. And we have been pleasantly surprised to find that that is not actually the case. The big, thing that these projects are looking for is consistency and ease of approval, because obviously they have a lot of hoops to jump through with the state as it is. So the real attraction for them to us is that, we have a consistent policy, so we're actually able to receive more in pilot payments than we would have been led to believe, a few years ago based on what New York State was saying. And that has been consistent with other IDAs in the area that are seeing these utility scale solar projects come into play and, are now pushing them towards their standard solar pilot policy.
One other question. Do we know one of the benefits, sort of corollary benefits to this project, was that NYSEG would be upgrading some of its infrastructure? Do we know if that in fact is the case, to what extent?
So Trulina is actually upgrading infrastructure on NYSEG's behalf. I don't have the specific dollar amounts, but I do know that they had to, I believe, install some additional substations and make some upgrades. So the developer was paying for that directly and then would be transferring those assets to NYSEG for ownership.
Okay.
Any other questions or further discussion?
The only other comment I would make is the public hearing that we had, which was all positive for this project in terms of moving forward. So the opportunity for the public to weigh in on this particular pilot seemed like it was favorable to move forward. There was one question on there. I don't know that to the extent that it would impact the decision by the IDA to offer a pilot, but it was around the labor. There was a question you said you were going to look into, I think maybe minority requirements, minority-owned business requirements.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to?
I have not had a
anything?
chance to look into those, but given the amount of assistance that's being received, I would anticipate that there is some sort of MWBE requirement that's being imposed by New York State. Thankfully for us, we don't have to deal with the administration of that, because that would be a huge burden to have to verify, but that will all be done through the appropriate channels with the state agencies.
Yeah, that was the only question that I saw. I was not at that public hearing, just reading the minutes. Was there any other question that was posed to you regarding the project? That was the only one I saw reading the minutes.
No, the only other questions we received were about the local labor usage and issues. And, as I said, we have our policy in place, which all of our projects have to adhere to. And additionally, I know these developers have been in contact with our local labor representatives about negotiating agreements with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? If not, could I have a motion to approve the final resolution?
I'll make the motion.
Second? Susan, second? Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Sarensini?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Steve, are you there? We're doing roll call vote for the final resolution for Trelina.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
Mr. Keim, Mr. Tom Murray, and Mr. Trout absent, motion carried.
Next item is a review of the IDA long-term forecast. Everyone received a copy with a blue cover. Sarah, if you could review this.
Sure, so we do this every year. We take a look at our financials when we get into budget season. So this year, we have our forecasts for 2021 as a whole. We have what we're budgeting for 2022, and then we go out until 2027 with projections, and that assumes that we receive each year $400,000 in income, which has sort of been our standard that we use. That's a pretty safe average for us. So this is sort of what the average expectation would be as far as the financial picture of the agency moving forward. So for this year, we're forecasting to have about $2.2 million cash available at the end of the year, which is an increase of $286,000. So positive cash position for this year, which is great. In the past, we've seen a lot of negatives, so we're moving in the right direction. And then again, you know, our budget for 2022 is looking extremely favorable, and we'll get into that more a little bit later. We are estimating agency fees of about $1.45 million, which is just historically,
That's
you know,
one of our highest numbers ever.
yes, ever. So that's great, although realistically, it's probably not repeatable every year. We are anticipating a substantial agency fee as a result of the Trelina project, which accounts for a large portion of that estimate. And then we've got sort of our standard expenses. There is a bit of an increase there on the salary side because we do anticipate making a new hire in the new year. But other than that, we're, you know, basically planning a $1.16 million increase in cash available, bringing us to about $3.4 million by the end of the year. And then if you look 2023 through 2027, just based on $400,000 worth of income, that would gradually decrease our cash position each year, although we stay more than solvent past 2022 with an estimated $2.6 million in cash available. So overall, it's positive, and obviously we hope to have many years where we're above what we're projecting here. And then the second page that you'll see in this long-term financial plan, sort of our worst case, and this is where we take only what we know we're going to have for revenue against what we traditionally have for expenses. So again, 2021 and 22, those haven't changed, but you'll see that our agency fees and our rental income are substantially decreased, and that's based on just what we have contracts for. Each year, it's roughly a total of $192,000 in income. Again, decreases our cash each year from 2023 through 2027. But again, even in a sort of worst case scenario, we still have about $1.4 million in operating cash on hand. So overall, we could have a terrible year and still be in business. Obviously, we don't anticipate this happening, but just to give you all an idea of where we stand, sort of average and worst case over the next few years.
If we looked at these numbers a year ago, the numbers would have been much different.
Yes. Yeah, so last year when we looked at it, it was, you know, similar, decreasing cash on hand, but our cash available would have dropped significantly, obviously as a result of specifically the Trelina project that really makes things more favorable for us, even in the worst case, so that we would be able to continue to operate if needed.
So any questions or comments on this?
Couple questions. You may have just explained this to me previously, Bob. The significant current cash available without the Trilina project, were there buckets, big buckets of where that originated from?
Well, it's agency fees. certainly the
Cumulative
biggest
agent,
bucket.
any significant windfalls in that?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, just the Longo project.
Other than that.
and-
So-
Other than Del Lago, okay.
Del Lago is the 100,000 that you see every year. That was a substantial agency fee that, when Bob Aronson was around, he chose to have it broken up in annual payments as opposed to a one-time payment. Other than that, our most substantial income is always our agency fees. Currently, we have quite a few other projects that will be fairly substantial agency fees for us as well. Wilkins RV is roughly around $90,000, same with New York Lodi 1. So those obviously contribute, just not to the same extent as, over $1 million from the Trilina project.
The additional position, the one that's causing the salaries and wages to go up, what would that be?
So the additional position, we are still working on some of the details of what exactly that would look like, and we would anticipate hiring somebody probably beginning of the second quarter of next year to coincide with Pat's planned retirement. Essentially, right now, that position is looking like it's going to be sort of a combination of a grants specialist to take care of our pass-through and other grants that we receive from the state and federal government. And then the other part would be really on the development side of things. So working with county and local planning departments to help facilitate businesses with their projects, helping us, with our new industrial park project that we're working on, helping to keep track of our database of shovel-ready sites that are sort of owned by private developers and not necessarily IDA owned. So there's quite a few things. We're also looking at the possibility of having somebody play maybe a small role in some additional marketing things. There's a lot of possibilities, and that's something that we'll be looking at more closely over the next few months. I hope to have a job description sort of polished before the end of this year that can then be advertised in the new year.
Yeah. So essentially, it's not a true headcount increase. It's
No, it's really
really going from
a shift.
we went, from 3 to 2.5. We'll be going back to 3. And there'll be some overlap between Pat before she retires sometime, and where the new person is up and
There's a
running.
lot of history right here.
I know there is, very much so.
So-
I know very much so.
Other questions about the long-term forecast?
It'd be nice to see numbers without a minus sign in front of them generally, that's all.
Yep.
Because I think it's possible. This is a windfall for Trilina, clearly, but it would be nice to find a way to make the numbers without the minus sign.
Well, and that's a great point, and that's something that historically has always been a little bit of a challenge for us. But this past year was a positive year. This year is likely to be a positive year, not based on what we had necessarily budgeted initially, and then 2022 should be a positive year. So basically, we'll have 3 years in a row, if all goes as forecasted and planned, of positive cash flow into the agency, whereas in 2019 it was negative. So we're moving in the right direction. The only reason this long-term forecast shows negatives is because, like I said, historically, our average revenue per year is roughly around $400,000. Obviously, with some of these projects, that's trending in the upward direction. But we would rather, for the purposes of this, sort of be realistic and not assume that we're always going to have, tremendously huge project years.
Okay.
Any forecast on the loan fund? do you see that growing, staying stable, and, I mean, is there more of a, will there be more of an emphasis to look at how the IDA can expand that program at all, or are you?
We are
satisfied?
looking at it, and we will actually have a loan report to review with you all at next month's meeting. I mean, that loan fund has been growing in the sense that we haven't had any defaults or anything on our loans. So all of the interest that we're accumulating is slowly growing it. We're finally starting to see additional traction with our loan fund, and I think that's in part due to some of the clarifications and some of the additional outreach that we've been doing, especially with our business retention visits. And then hopefully, we'll be able to get the word out there even more about the fund and try to continue to promote it with our local banks and loan officers so that they have a better understanding of, what we can do to help them as a gap financer with projects. So it's all going in the right direction, and we can certainly talk about that more at our next month's meeting.
Okay. Next on the agenda, presentation and approval of the proposed 2022 budget and posting to Paris.
So, we already talked about this a little bit with the long-term forecast, but you all received a copy of our proposed budget for 2022. It also shows what our actuals were for 2020, what our budget was for 2021, our actuals for the first half of the year, and then what we're actually forecasting for the year. So I would say to pay close attention to the 2021 forecast. That's where we're actually expecting to have positive revenue at the end of the year. And then as far as the budget for next year, we are proposing a total of $1.45 million in agency fees. Again, that is assuming that the Trilina project closes in the new year. It could hypothetically close in December. Either way, we expect to see the revenue, just a matter of timing. That includes the proposed agency fee for the Wilkins RV project, and that includes the proposed agency fee for the Best Made Products pilot project out at Deer Run. So we anticipate those probably moving to closing and final approval early in the new year. We also are projecting $54,000 from Seneca County. That's our annual support payment that we get. That hasn't been finalized yet. They're going through their budget process. But that's historically what we've received over the past few years, and we have no reason to believe that's going to decrease. We have $100,000 for rent and lease income. That is our annual contracted payment from Del Lago. We have some RLF income projected here, and if I'm not mistaken, that is interest payments that are anticipated from the loans. That's not going to include payments of principal.
That's strictly income.
Strictly, yes. So this is strictly new income into the RLF that's projected for the new year. We have IDA interest income, which is on our CDs and our savings accounts. We're projecting $37,000 in property sales, so that is for the Best Made Products project, again, because we anticipate the actual closing probably to happen in the new year. And then miscellaneous income, $2,000, that's sort of just something that we always put in there. So we're estimating our total operating revenues to be about $1.66 million for the new year. Going down to payroll, our proposed budget is about $220 for payroll, $127 in benefits. Those are, again, consistent with the plan for a new hire and such. And in reality, they may end up being less, depending on timing of everything and the circumstances of my taking family leave in the beginning of the year. We've got $96,000 budgeted for professional fees and services. There is a bit of a change here versus what we are forecasting for the rest of this year, and that it's increased a little bit. That's solely due to the fact that we are making some changes to our chart of accounts and reclassifying some things to make them more appropriate. So there really isn't any substantial additional professional fees that we're projecting, it just because of the reclassification. And that's the same, with general office, we're projecting an increase versus what our forecast is for the year. Although we don't often end up spending that much, as you can tell from what our actuals are and what our forecasts are. Admin and technical, we're budgeting roughly $17,000. Again, this is one that's jumping considerably because of the reclassification of the chart of accounts. Insurance, budgeted $7,000. We found that $2,500 for 2021 was way under budget, so we took what our actual insurance spending is and adjusted that appropriately. Miscellaneous budgeted at $2,000. Travel and conferences at $6,000, which is lower than what our 2021 budget was, but obviously COVID is still ongoing. We've seen an increase in virtual conferences and things, so we're able to save some money there on travel costs. Repairs and maintenance is the same as what we typically budget, $3,500. That covers more or less the mowing and maintenance over at Deer Run Industrial Park. $10,000 for marketing and promotion, and then RLF expense of $1,825, and the RLF expense would be related to specifically the annual single audit that we get on our loan fund. Bringing our total operating expenses for the year to $506,000. And then going down to what we have for other income and expenses, we have $110 in governmental grants. That is specifically what's remaining from our Empire State Development Grant that we received a few years ago. That is the money that we're intending to use for the feasibility study for a new industrial park site. So then, again, that's coming out as other expense because we're intending to spend that in 2022 to close out the grant, spend it on the feasibility study. So that brings our net income for the year projected to be, again, the $1.16 million roughly. Are there any questions about the proposed
Probably
budget?
note too, this is a cash basis budget, does not include depreciation costs.
Thanks, Bob.
Is there a trade-off between, again, I'm looking at this picture, receipt here on the income side. What is the trade-off, I guess, between taking it one time or doing it over time, do you think?
In the end, the effect is going to be the same, it's just whether you do it one chunk or you do it overall. Sometimes it's better to, if your cash position is one where it's a challenge,
Right.
having those dollars come in on an ongoing basis probably doesn't hurt us. It's a
Big number.
It's a matter of a choice.
It is a big number, I don't think we have any reason right now to need to spread it out like we did for Del Lago. Honestly, I would anticipate us receiving, more in agency fees in 2022 than what we're actually budgeting for, because again, this doesn't account for projects that may be in our pipeline and coming up timing wise. We only really do the projects that we for sure know about and have actual estimated numbers, which really come from their applications. So, we have, and we'll get to this when we get to the Q3 report, but we have very healthy project pipeline right now, almost 30 projects that we know about, that we're aware of, that could be coming over the next, year or two or three, depending. So I have no reason to believe that, we would be negatively impacted by having the Trilina payment come as a one-time thing. And additionally, with us looking at the industrial park right now, one of the discussions that we'll be having near the end of the year, beginning of next year is, the funding of the project and how we go about selecting a site, acquiring the site, and then dealing with the development of the land. I will point out that a lot of other IDAs that have done much larger industrial parks do use a portion of their agency fees to help fund some of that development. That may or may not be necessary in our case. Ideally, we'll be able to tap into some other funds and sort of, limit the impact that we're having on our cash position. But I think it's good timing for us to have this sort of influx in case we need it for some of our other projects that will help promote future growth.
Do we have an investment policy, something that stipulates what we can or cannot do with the money to make it work for us?
I believe we do have an
Yes,
investment
we have
policy,
investment.
yes. And that's one that we'll be reviewing. Our policies get updated every year, as you all know. So that's one that we can look at. But the other thing that we're going to be looking at in terms of the industrial park, obviously we have the EDC and the funding corp with some money in the bank, not a lot of activity going through them. So, one possibility would be to do sort of a joint effort with all three agencies to help make this feasible. So there's a lot of options that we can look at. And obviously we're not there yet because we still need to get through the feasibility study and get project cost estimates and things. But it's nice that we'll have a lot of flexibility between where we are in the IDA, the EDC, and the funding corp.
It appears that the activity level that's occurred in the last year and going forward, comparing that to, say, some previous timeframes, is much different. We're seeing a lot of action, a lot of things are going on.
And at our December meeting, December or January, we'll provide sort of a year-end report to the board. Did that last year and showed what 2019 was compared to 2020. This year we'll add 2021 and we'll look at 3 years, and you'll see that things have been trending in a much more positive direction in terms of project flow and everything else. So it's been very good. We're able to track all that now. Our CRM has been great for being able to help us capture all this data and to know what is coming in the future and when things might be hitting as far as timing wise. So I'll be happy to share that all with you as we look to one of those meetings.
Future looks good.
We're very excited. It's a good time to be in the IDA.
Okay. So, any other questions on the budget? If not, we need to have a motion to approve so that can be posted to Paris.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Srensione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Keim? Mr. Tom Murray? And Mr. Trout absent. Motion carried.
Next item on the agenda, everyone received the engagement letter from Mengel, Metzger, Barr, Raymond, Wigner, et cetera. So, Sarah? Too many names.
This was reviewed by the IDA Audit Committee when they last met in September. And at the time, just so you're all aware, we had decided to go out and request quotes from some other agencies just to see if we wanted to change, because this is the year that we need to assign a new lead auditor. It's something we have to do every 5 years, but that does not necessarily require a change in firms. Anyway, after reviewing the proposals that we received, the audit committee decided to recommend staying with Mengel, Metzger, and Barr as the sort of best option and the lowest cost option. You will see that the quote for this year's audit is $12,625. It's a small increase from last year of $375, and that includes both the IDA audit and the single audit for the loan fund. Are there any questions?
No, hearing none. Can I have a motion to approve the engagement letter? Susan makes the motion. Second?
I'll second it.
So Kelly?
Mr. Brusow?
Yes.
Mrs. Cerencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Kime, Mr. Tom Murray, and Mr. Trout absent, motion carried.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, Jeff, if you could provide an update on the Seneca County Chamber of Commerce activities?
Certainly, Steve. Well, like Sarah said, it's a good time to be the IDA. It's a good time to be in the Chamber of Commerce as well. Lots of exciting stuff happening here in Seneca County. I think for this group, most notably, we held our most recent One Seneca meeting this morning, and we finished collecting data from a survey on infrastructure that the group put out. Received a big response rate, 73 responses in a couple of weeks' time, which was really positive. So the chamber, the county, and the IDA are getting together. In fact, we met yesterday with the county manager, Sarah and myself did, to hash out the information that was presented in that survey and then start to pick out some themes for presentation to the county Board of Supervisors, to share the information with them and advocate for the use of investment in infrastructure development. So I thought that was really positive. That group continues to meet on a weekly basis for a half an hour every Thursday morning. So I would encourage anyone to join when you get the time. It's a really, I think, very strong group, and moving forward, I see that as having a big impact on Seneca County's development. From a chamber standpoint, we are seeing significant growth in tourism. That is something that has been indicated in our internal research and the projects that we have put, but it's also being borne out through the numbers. And so we are really encouraged about the advertising and the awareness that we're making for Seneca County is having an impact on development, economic development, visitation across the board. So very, very positive and productive past month at the Chamber of Commerce. I'll end with this, just on the heels of the tourism focus. The Chamber helped get national exposure for bird watching, and we had a national story that appeared in the Boston Globe last Sunday, if any of you tuned in, featured Montezuma Wildlife Preserve, as well as, or National Wildlife Refuge, as well as Seneca Meadows Wetlands Preserve. So it was a story that was picked up by the Boston Globe and then syndicated to other channels. So we got some great publicity for Seneca County. Next Sunday, the CBS Saturday Morning Show will be filming at Miranda Cheese on a story of that we pitched to them on how the generational dairy farmer industry has had to reinvent themselves, if you will. And we put up Miranda Cheese as being a shining example of that here in our own community. And so they are sending their correspondent down with a film crew. We'll be filming at Miranda next Sunday. Miranda hosts Music in Their Barn every Sunday. So we'd love to see any of you or your friends at Miranda to fill in the crowd, to have a really nice representation from Seneca County at Miranda Cheese. It'll be, I think their series goes 2 to 4, 2 to 5. I think it probably on their website for Miranda Cheese. But come down and maybe be a background in the Saturday CBS Saturday Morning Show.
Is that a week from Sunday?
Yeah, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday.
Okay,
That's what we,
thanks, Jeff. Yeah, very positive. So Don Trout isn't here. I don't know if there's anything that you know of, Sarah, on the supervisor side?
I mean, the only updates I have, sort of similar to last time, we're getting ready to move forward on the final closing documents for the transfer of the 414 sewer line to the county. We're just waiting on the county attorney to get draft documents to us for review. Aside from that, no, nothing. I mean, Jeff had already mentioned this, but we're, going to be presenting as One Seneca, the survey results, and a few specific infrastructure project proposals to the special committee of the Board of Supervisors at the end of the month of October. That's all that I'm really aware of at the moment from the Board of Supervisors side.
Okay.
Raise one, just to echo Jeff and Sarah's comments about the One Seneca plan. I think they both have done a really good job with Mitch Rowe to take the IDA's strategic plan. I mean, strategic plans are notorious for sitting on the shelf. They have taken this plan and moved it in a direction where it's actually begun to focus on a very narrow set of priorities for the county. I've been on these calls since they began back in, April or May of last year. And I think it's done a really good job looking at infrastructure, looking at broadband, sewage, and water. And I also think this is the strategic plan's got the IDA's name on it. I think it's a great plan. I really do. And so I would urge the IDA to, in addition to Sarah's involvement, I would love it if other members of the IDA board at least considered putting their thumbprint or some endorsement of this, because it really, I think, illustrates the leadership position of that the IDA took. And unless we do reinforce it, we may not see the benefit of this work. So I think it's really good work. It's not even close to being done yet, but I think it's right on the right track. And kudos to Sarah and Jeff and Mitch Rowe for doing it.
Thank you, Bruce.
Next on the agenda is the third quarter IDA report.
So you all received a copy of the report in your board packets. Again, just to reiterate, 2021 is shaping up to be, our strongest year yet, and obviously 2022 is looking equally strong. We are continuing to see growth, like I mentioned, in our project pipeline, in the number of projects that we're actually closing, as well as in our business retention and expansion program. So again, to reiterate, at the beginning of this year, we had established some goals, some metrics that we wanted to make sure that we met by the end of the year. We continue to remain on track with those. So our year-end goal for project wins was 6. The way that we are classifying a project win for our purposes of the reporting means that the applications for the projects have been received and have achieved at least initial approval of the IDA board, although some of these may not seek the final approval or closing until the new year. So we had identified a goal of 6 wins before the end of the year. We have met those 6 based on the criteria I just stated, and those, as you're all aware, we approved a Schrader Farms loan earlier this year. That's been fully closed. The Trilina Solar Project, which we just did final approval for and will be moving towards closing. Keystone Mills has received their final approval from us. New York Lodi 1 had their initial approval with a public hearing. And we've got Best Made, which we've already approved the first step of the sale of 2 lots at Deer Run. We've approved the initial application for a pilot. They're also working with us on a revolving loan fund application. And then we have the Wilkins RV project, which received initial approval of their pilot application. So great year. I'm happy to say that, we're not even into the fourth quarter yet, and we've already sort of hit our target. So that's wonderful. In terms of business retention, actually, let me go back to the project. So just some highlights that I pulled out from these projects. They're expected to invest approximately $166.5 million into our county. They're expected to retain 104 employees, create 51 new permanent jobs, and over 250 construction jobs. So that's obviously not just huge for us, that's huge for the community. And it's great that we're seeing this kind of growth right now, both in our projects and, again, in terms of what Jeff touched on with tourism in the county. In terms of the business retention program, that we had outlined a goal of 50 visits for the year. We have done 36 as of when this report was drafted, and we're continuing to do more, so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to meet our goal at the end of the year. There is a slight slowdown, in summertime as people take vacations, but we should be able to pick that up and meet at least 50 before the end of the year. Last time I gave a report to you all, we were making significant headway on a lot of our strategic priorities. We continue to do so. You're all aware of most of what they are at this point, and we'll touch more on them specifically at the end of the year and which ones we achieved and which ones we're still making progress on. Are there any questions about this?
I guess, yeah, another positive report, definitely making a lot of progress. Any other business that we have?
We do not have any other business.
Nope. So, I request a motion to enter into executive session under Public Officers Law, Article 7, Section 105, to discuss the financial, credit, or employment history of a particular corporation or matters leading to the approval of a contract for a particular corporation. Bruce, second? Susan, second? Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Srencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Kime, Mr. Tom Murray, and Mr. Trout absent, motion carried.
So we're back out of executive session. During executive session, we were discussing engineering services for our proposed industrial park site. Just as a brief history, that we are looking to create a new industrial site somewhere in the county, and looking at different engineering firms to assist us in doing that. We propose entering into a contract with MRB for those services, and before you, there's a resolution to contract MRB for those services. So could I have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Srencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Kime, Mr. Tom Murray, and Mr. Trout absent, motion carried.
So I guess favorite part of the meeting now, with nothing else, have a motion to adjourn the IDA portion.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone want to continue? A little crazy, but financial, have the financial statement. Basically, there wasn't very little activity on the financials. Looking at really the second page, which is summary schedule of comparative balance sheet, you'll notice on the assets, there's $168,934, And then right underneath, other current assets of $866,263. The $866,000 is payments for the Memorial Cemetery, which will need to be written off as we go through. So the true real assets of the EDC is $168,000.
Right.
And everything else, again, will be later on, will be written
When I
off.
do a
And
consolidated statement between the EDC and the cemetery, on a combined basis, they eliminate each other.
to close that off. So essentially, yes, so that's the current amount, and expenses are minimal, mainly just now getting to be audit fees, audit legal fees. So with that, a motion to approve the financial statements?
And that audit fee is what we just did in the full board, right? That's.
This is a separate audit fee.
It's gonna be another-
Separate.
Yep, so we'll have a separate engagement letter
Okay.
for approval. The audit fee for this past year was $1,650. So not a lot of money.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, motion to approve the financial statements.
Yeah, so moved.
Second, Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Keim, absent, motion carried.
So next on the list, the EDC preliminary budget, which Sarah can review. Not much here.
Not much here. So the only real, I guess, notable revenue for the EDC is a pass-through grant that we have in the amount of $600,000. That's for Earl Martin Seneca Dairy project for the galvanizing facility. So you'll see that even though that shows up as revenue, it also shows up as expense to be paid back out to him. Other than that, on the expense side, we have about $19,000 budgeted for professional fees, which is the auditing, CFO, our accountant. And those may change just because obviously we are seeing decreased activity now in the EDC without the cemetery. We had budgeted for everything for a full year, but we're looking at the possibility of doing some 6-month contracts potentially. Other than that, we've got our insurance at $4,500, and then we have a couple of special fees and payments and miscellaneous items that are thrown in, which aren't necessarily even ever really needed. And then you'll see at the bottom there's sort of a combined EDC and cemetery budget, but obviously there are no expenses related to the cemetery anymore, so that's zeroed out. And we are projecting a net loss of about $26,000 for the year. So again, part of the reason why we're looking at, what the future of the EDC could be. We just continue to take losses every year, and
Yes, another
there
5,
are
6,
better
7
uses
years, we'll be
potentially
out
of
of
that money.
So any?
You could buy a lot of golf hole signs at the chamber tournament.
Okay, well, I guess maybe that's for next month. So, any other questions, Jeff, you have on the budget?
That sums it up pretty
Okay,
good.
so, have a motion to approve the budget, posting to Paris.
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Keim, absent, motion carried.
Okay. So again, we have a long-term forecast for the EDC, similar to how we do for the IDA. In this case, it's just our worst-case forecast, because again, we really have no income coming in. This shows us still continuing to have positive cash on hand through 2026, and then in 2027, all of a sudden, we're running negative. So it gives us a fairly, tight timeline by which things would need to be sort of taken care of. But again, I think the discussion of using EDC and funding corp funds to help with the build out of an industrial park would be a great use. And then potentially dissolving the agency unless we can come up with some sort of substantial economic activity, you know, that we should be promoting. But it seems like most of it is flowing through the IDA at the moment. We don't see a lot of demand for services provided by the EDC or the funding corp.
Is there any advantages for getting, are you in a position to take title to grants any easier from an EDC than you would be from an IDA?
I don't think
I
so.
think it's what, just accepting donations?
You can accept donations in the EDC, you can't in the IDA.
Not that people are beating down our door to provide us donations. It's one of those things, a lot of other counties do have, aside from the IDA, they have local development corps, which is essentially what the EDC is. They tend to find more traction for them, but a lot of them use their LDC specifically to manage a loan fund. So that's like the case with Ontario County. We're fortunate in that our loan fund, because it was through the Economic Development Administration, we were sort of grandfathered into the IDA being able to manage that. But traditionally, it would have to be an LDC that would manage a loan fund. So, you know, I'm not really sure in our case what the benefits would be of keeping the EDC, being that that's sort of the primary activity that the other agencies do. Additionally, you know, other counties will have an LDC for bonding purposes. That's what the funding corp was really established for, but we've only ever done one bond through the funding corp. And again, we don't see a lot of demand for that in the area. So, you know, the question is it really worth keeping around an agency to do a bond like once every decade when we have annual Paris reporting that is just as stringent for these two organizations as it is for the IDA. So it's a lot of administrative burden. There's, you know, the additional cost of being audited every year, the additional legwork associated. It's one of those things that, you know, we could always look at reestablishing an agency, I think, in the future if we really needed to. But as of right now, we're just not seeing the kind of demand for services from either of these agencies when the IDA can currently provide and take care of most of that.
If you had to reconstitute a unit like that in the future, what would the cost be?
We have to look into that. I'm assuming it
Again,
would mostly be legal,
Right.
legal fees from Rob to draft documents. Although in some ways, I think that maybe that could be streamlined a little bit, given that we've sort of already had these agencies, and so we would, you know, obviously still have copies of what the incorporating documents were, the bylaws, those kinds of things, so there wouldn't be as much groundwork for him to do on drafting of things. You know, and it's something we should have a serious conversation about. It's one of those matters where, unless we're really going to have the bandwidth and the time to go out and aggressively promote programs that are specific to the EDC or the funding corp, we're just not seeing the kind of inbound traffic that, you know, makes either of these agencies really relevant. And it's just sort of additional time burden on board members, on staff. So, I mean, that's kind of been my perspective so far from both. I mean, obviously, the EDC was great for the purposes of managing the cemetery. It was great. I mean, we still have this Earl Martin grant that we have to sort of take care of, but the IDA is able to do pass-through grants to companies if needed, so there really isn't an issue there. You know, the biggest limitations would be, I suppose, if we had like another not-for-profit or somebody that wanted to approach us for assistance, you know, that wouldn't traditionally go through the IDA. That'd have to go through one of these other agencies. But there's so much assistance in the community and regionally and statewide for nonprofits that I don't know how important it is for us to have an agency to do that when there's so many, you know, grant programs and things available. But I don't know, I think that's certainly up for discussion.
Well, the necessity of it EDC with the cemetery situation, that had to stay that way.
Mhm.
Now that that's
And
behind us.
historically, the EDC was also used, and Pat knows this better than I do, but was also used for the Army depot.
Right,
And the
transition.
transition of it, and also I believe when we had an active lease with the railroad for their containers, right?
Car storage, yeah.
So obviously that hasn't been a factor either. So really we haven't seen any activity or demand for such out of the EDC. There's kind of historic things that were necessary at one point in time that just no longer are.
So, next on the agenda, really two things both related. First is the 2020 response to the audit, and the second one is the engagement letter for the calendar year 2021 audit coming up.
Yes. So in your packet, you have a draft response in regards to the management letter that was sent to us for our 2020 audit, where, you know, they had pointed out the deficient net assets for the cemetery, and that, you know, our response is just more or less saying that the cemetery operations have been transferred to the county and then actually the state, because it's now a state owned cemetery, and that basically the items that they brought up as potential concerns are really not an issue.
It's appropriate.
So we just,
Response.
So it's an appropriate response, so I guess just need a motion to formally approve that response.
Yep, so moved.
I'll second. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Keim, absent, motion carried.
okay, and then the engagement letter, so this would be to conduct our 2021 audit. Again, there was not a substantial increase in the total payments. Earlier, sorry, I said the audit fee I think was like $1,600. That I think was the payment that we did for them to file our tax returns. Our total audit is broken down on page like 4 or 5 or so.
$7,200, $7,225.
Yep, $72.25. That includes the audit for the EDC, the audit for the cemetery, and then the tax returns that we do annually.
So, yeah, another reason if we don't need the EDC, why continue with the expense? So need a motion to approve the engagement letter for the calendar 2021 audit.
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Keim, absent, motion carried.
Other business? None?
No?
No executive session? So Jeff, motion to adjourn?
I make that move.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
So we're done with the Seneca County Economic Development Corporation meeting. The last one on the set is for the Seneca County Funding Corp.
And Jeff, you're free to stay or free to go. It's up to you.
I've enjoyed my time, but I will start to mosey on out.
Okay.
So this one is just a little bit more, a lot of little odds and ends to this. So I guess, Kelly, just to start off, the two members of the Seneca County Funding Corp, Bob Kernan and myself, both present. So first item on the agenda is election of officers for 21 and 22. Yes, we looked at.
We did not do an annual meeting this year for the funding corp yet, which is why we are doing approvals for both years for officers, committee appointments, and resolutions. So then we'll be covered in terms of annual meeting for both 2021 and 22.
So at this point, we've been operating this year with officers, myself as chair, Bob Kernan as secretary treasurer. Yes, Bob, would you like to keep that for 2022? So I guess have a motion to approve that officer slate with myself being chair and you being treasurer secretary for both years. So have a motion?
So,
I'll second. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
yes.
Motion carried.
Second is we have our copy of our meeting minutes, which was a video conference due to COVID. I don't have any comments or questions.
I move their adoption.
I'll second.
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
For committee appointments, the way we've had it is for both, for the governance committee, audit committee, and finance committee. Bob Kernan is chair of all three, with me being a member of all three. Need a motion to continue?
So moved.
I'll second.
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And now we have a number of resolutions which, again, are broken up between 21 and 22.
And we can do joint approval of all of them for both years. So just to quickly review what the resolutions are, so we have the designation of our banking institutions. So we've got Chemung Canal Trust Company, M&T Bank, Generations Bank, Generations Commercial Bank, Community Bank, Five Star Bank, Lions National Bank, and Savannah Bank. As far as check signatures, we have following individuals authorized to sign checks. So the chairman, the vice chairman, although we don't have one, secretary, treasurer, executive director, CEO. Terms of legal counsel, these resolutions designate the Halpin firm as legal counsel for the funding corporation. Designates Rio and F. Wagner CPA as our corporation auditors. And again, we'll have another approval of the engagement letter for that. We have designation of our CEO / CFO being myself. And then accountant and bookkeeper being Dermody, Burke, and Brown on the accountant side, and Eleanor Beatty as our bookkeeper.
So with that, unless there's any objection, I'd like just to do that as one motion for all the resolutions.
So moved.
I'll second.
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Separately, Kelly provided us with annual disclosure forms that we need to sign and return to her, so
Yes.
we keep out of trouble. Next is, similar as we did with the EDC, we have the response letter to the previous audit.
Yep, let me just pull up the page, sorry here, okay. So again, we get the same thing in the management letter from the auditors every year. This is related to time study, specifically about whether or not we should be allocating bookkeeping or administrative expenses to the funding corp. Our response every year is always the same, that we continue to keep an eye on it, but really there isn't substantial enough activity in the funding corp to merit us allocating for that separately within that agency. we just need approval to send this letter back to the auditing
So
team.
moved.
Second?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next item is the engagement letter.
Yep, so engagement letter for the funding corp. We have an audit fee of $2,175, and then $650 related to Paris. Again, proposing to stay with Mengel, Metzger, and Barr. Any
So
questions?
moved.
Yep, I'll second.
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And then last, we have the annual budget and posting to Paris.
So budget, pretty simple, same as the EDC. There are no revenues. The only expenses are $2,825 in professional fees, which is basically our auditing and our accounting, and then we always budget $1,000 for legal, although we don't generally use that. We also budget another $1,000 for other expenses. Again, we don't generally use that, but our total projected for the year is a net loss of $4,825.
So,
Need a motion to
motion to
accept
approve?
that?
Yes.
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
I think there's no other business.
No other business.
No executive session. So Bob, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
So we're done with the Seneca Falls Funding Corporation meeting. Thank you, everyone.